business, and I've got one too. You can't mind your business. What's the matter with you?
Welcome to another episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Vandergrift, and with me today is our campaign connoisseur, Lorraine Kessler. Lorraine, how you doing today? That is a new one.
Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Good. We took a break from you for 1 week to have Alicia on our podcast, and so it's good to have you back.
Yep.
Have some interesting, we normally do brand news before we talk about our topic, but today is all brand news.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's kind of like, how would I characterize it? Like bad moves corrected. Maybe that's the way to think about it.
Yeah.
Good. So we're going to talk about Max, which was formerly HBO Max, which is now again HBO Max. And you might remember about 2 years ago, HBO Max dropped HBO and just went with Max. And even at that time, people were like, what in the world are you doing? And we'll talk about one of our favorite, shall we call him a contrarian, who predicted this would all happen. So anyhow, the move that Max made to go back to HBO Max, the original reasoning for going to Max was because they merged with Discovery Plus, and they said they wanted to offer a broader selection of content. So as we know, trying to offer it all doesn't ever go well with positioning, and it doesn't make much of a differentiator. And then the name change just didn't resonate with people. So, what do you introduce in that instance? Pure confusion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know that, along with many others, we continue to call it HBO Max because our brains couldn't think of it any other way. So 2 years later, and Warner Brothers Discovery finally says we're going back to HBO Max, big shocker. And the media release that announced Max to become HBO Max this summer stated, returning the HBO brand into HBO Max will further drive the service forward and amplify the uniqueness that subscribers can expect from the offering. So I think it goes back to your assumption, Lorraine, that people get paid like $1 million for each word they put in these news releases. But amplify the uniqueness portion of this statement stands out to me because there was not much uniqueness when they decided to settle on one of the most generic names,
Right.
Max. So, Lorraine, I've done enough pontificating around it. Why don't you explain why the move to Max was a poor decision, and then we'll talk about a couple other things in regard to this.
Well, first of all, HBO, and it used to be HBO before HBO Max.
Yes.
I remember that.
Yep.
And it was the first pay for TV quality programming where they actually made original movies. I remember one, Still the Night, with Roy Scheider and Meryl Streep. That was really fantastic, even though Meryl Streep later said it was the worst movie she ever made. But we really enjoyed it. And my family, I always called my parents the original boomers because we were the first to have pay TV, push button phone, air conditioning, take weeks long vacations. No one did any of this stuff. So I always think my parents were way ahead of it. But, simply just look at the name, right? Max is, as you said, so generic. It means nothing. I mean, when you're doing branding, it's make meaning. You have to make meaning. I didn't know what the Max meant. I didn't know why they changed it. All I knew is I had to change the app on my TV screen from HBO Max to Max, and now I'll have to go back to HBO Max. So there were no specifics.
First world problem.
Yeah, it's like what? And the statement you read just proves to me, these companies and their agencies think more about this stuff than their consumers. I doubt if you took a poll or did a survey rather, that many people knew why they went to Max. And just as few would know why they're going back to HBO Max. They might think they're two different entities. I'm sure there's lots of confusion. So it's a self-inflicted wound, which we see a lot. The good side of that is someone in the agency world is getting a lot of money with all this back and forth stuff. So yay for the industry.
Yeah.
But the name just doesn't trickle down. And as you mentioned, I think our contrarian, that's Scott Galloway,
Yes.
right? And that's where I first saw the mention of this going back to HBO Max. And it was born out of a merger, as you said, with Discovery, which I don't even know what Discovery stands for. It's like it's a program platform. I don't know what their mojo is or what they stand for. And breadth, anytime you hear someone saying we're going to broaden our line or breadth, like, whoa, watch out. I mean, those are dangerous words.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the original HBO, before even Max, Breath didn't build their brand, as Galloway said. Breath didn't build it. It was prestige. They really had first cut movies, quality, original programming. They were like the first to the gate on that. So as bad as this is, it's good they're going back. But they won't clear up the confusion if they don't start to do a better job, I think, in their marketing and in the content, getting back to the original quality content that they used to have.
Yep. Well, let me read you a couple of things that were in his podcast episode from 2 years ago. I'm sure he's sitting there now saying, I told you so.
Yeah.
We have our own example of I told you so here. We'll talk about it, our second brand. But this one, when they first switched to Max, when that was announced and when it went to Max, he named a couple things. So his talking points during the video were this. HBO Max spent decades building a brand. You can't build a quality brand like HBO in just a few years. So it's the longevity, right? We always say that. HBO Max is known for their shows and their powerful emotional media moments. So that's part of what you were just saying. HBO spends less than Netflix. So the comparison is 2 to 3 billion for HBO/Max. Netflix was spending around 18 billion. And which shows are more talked about? So there's the White Lions or the White Lotus that everyone was just talking about recently, and now The Last of Us. And there's popular shows like Succession, Game of Thrones, The Sopranos. So they're just known for putting out quality shows versus Netflix. I think he calls like the Walmart of media.
Yeah, that fits.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they just greenlight any idea for shows, movies. It feels like Hallmark. It's just like this formulaic boom, 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 boom. And all you do is you switch out the bodies and you twist the plot a little bit. Instead of falling down on an ice rink, you fall off a ladder. And that's when they have their, you fell into my arms moment. Netflix is kind of the same thing. They're having these formulaic things. Whereas HBO is really seen, what he says, as the luxury brand of media. So that's why he said changing the name to Max backtracks all of that work.
Yeah.
So let's comment on Scott Galloway's HBO Max podcast episode, spending decades to build their brand and how they're known for quality shows. So talk about that a little bit more.
Well, I think that, firstly, that's great info. I didn't know that Scott Galloway predicted this. I only picked up the post-mortem on the name change back. I would say HBO was the first. I mean, when you have the position of the first as a pay TV channel that has content that people are willing to pay. And remember, this was a time when all TV was free. I mean, that was a huge switch. So they really, to me, led the way for all these channels. The one disagreement, and it's hard to disagree with Scott, but I wouldn't do it in person.
Yeah, really.
I'm not sure about the luxury brand part of it. in my mind, only because the last few years, I mean, yeah, Game of Thrones was huge, right? And Sopranos was unbelievable. But the last few years, they seem to have fallen off that scale. That a lot of these channels to me have blurred this space, if you will. I'm finding some really great original content on Paramount Plus. I'm finding great content on Prime Video, not so much created, but good uncut movies and things. So it's just a blurred space right now. And I do think that they own that position at one time. But again, when you stretch your brand and you do these self-inflicted wounds to yourself, you diffuse, you degrade, you devolve the brand. You don't
Mm-hmm.
evolve it to something greater. So on that part, I totally agree.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you can look at this in a couple other areas. Starbucks comes to mind with the new CEO. They're really trying to get back to that coffee experience. And I don't
Right.
think they can regain that because now you have tons of competitors that have emulated what they were doing. And even though you are noticing a difference when you go into an actual Starbucks location, they're offering free refills again. They're offering to deliver your drink to your wherever your table is in a mug. They're writing your name and a little ditty on your cup. So they are trying to get back to it with the new CEO, but I don't think they can get back to where they were, which is, back in the day, you would go sit this right in front of you and it was your way of saying, this is part of my identity.
Right.
Now it's just, okay, I'm getting a drink I enjoy. And if I sit at a Starbucks, it's a good experience again. They're not just trying to push me out the door, which is what they went to, and do just the drive-through Starbucks and make it transactional. I think with what you're saying with HBO Max is they're not going to be able to get back to what they had before because other people have moved into the market to fill
Well, they
that
can, but
void.
not easily. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't do it just with the ridiculous press releases and words,
Yeah.
like amplify whatever. You have to,
Amplify your uniqueness.
yeah. You can't. The way to amplify your uniqueness is to create content that's as breakthrough and as watchable as Game of Thrones, as Sopranos. Like, get back to the core.
Yep.
And you can't just do one show. You have to have like a volume of this. You have to be committed to that in such a way that you're not devolving. Because as you look at Prime and you look at Netflix, as you said, they have everything on the shelf. So they've cluttered their shelf. They may have some premium content, original content, but there's a bunch of other stuff too.
Yeah.
So, I think they do have an opportunity, but it's not going to be easy because it requires, what does it cost to produce a Game of Thrones or a Sopranos or one of these great shows? It's
Well,
not.
let's take a side trip on this discussion because this is interesting. I think it's changed
Mhm.
the idea of advertising actual platforms. So
Mhm.
I know my wife and I, we've subscribed to a couple streaming platforms because of the buzz about the show itself.
Right.
So the product has become the advertisement. I'll give you an example. Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin and Martin
Yeah.
Short.
I subscribe to Hulu.
Heard a ton of people talking about it that are my age, that are folks that I would normally agree with. So guess what? We got a Hulu subscription just so we could see that. And we binge watched the first 4 episodes, and now we're excited about the 5th season coming out.
Yep.
That's supposed to come out this summer. So that's an example where I really haven't seen a ton of advertising for Hulu because of where I was consuming media, but I ended up getting Hulu because of the content.
Well,
Right?
it's no different than the movie industry, Mark.
Yeah. Yep.
Nobody says, "Hey, what's Warner Brother producing today?"
Right.
Right? Right? They look, the movie's the attraction, and then you go, and it's produced by more. I mean, these platforms are very much like that. They're the
Yeah.
serving agent, but it's the attraction that drives you in. So it's really no different. And I've done the same. That's why the behavior follows the show.
Yeah.
I resubscribed to HBO Max when Game of Thrones came out, right?
Mhm.
I wasn't subscribed for a long time. Same thing with you, Only Murders in the Building. That's why I have Hulu.
Yeah.
I actually have the Hulu Disney bundle. I don't watch anything on Disney because there's nothing there that attracts me.
No.
So that is the whole key to the what HBO needs to get back to where it was.
Yeah. So the product really is the advertisement in this
Right.
case.
Right.
Yep. Good. So one last thing, because their PR release was like dud, right? Like we
Yeah.
just discussed, but they've done a good job. They're using humor to kind of like make light of their failed attempt at
Yeah.
using Max as the rebrand. And what are your thoughts on that type of approach? They're almost poking fun at themselves.
Hey, that is the best approach you can possibly have, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to be self defacing. I mean, that shows a humility. And people really respond to that. Once you make yourself kind of vulnerable, and are able to get a laugh out of that, people go along with that.
Yeah.
It creates a humanity for the brand too. And so I think that's all good. What are you going to do? Are you going to be imperious and blame the audience or what have you? I mean, I really don't know what other option you have other than to do that. So I think it was smart that they went this route.
Yep. Well, and what it speaks to me about a little bit is just the change in personnel.
Mhm.
Every new marketing director or CMO or whatever walks in the door, they feel like they got to mess with the brand.
Right.
Instead of just saying, where are we? What are we doing? How can I add or pour on the meaning that our brand has, instead of let's rip it all out,
Yeah.
insert something new, and then, as Galloway says, you've ruined decades of good work on that brand.
Right. Well, and part of this was hubris too. It's inside out thinking instead of outside in. Did I say that right? Yeah, inside out. Yeah. What's important to you as a company? Oh, we did this merger. And so we want to make sure that we give kudos to Warner Brothers. And so we're now HBO Max. I don't know exactly how that connects all the way to Warner Brothers, but that Warner Brothers has a lot of content. It just anytime you're working and you're in this, what do you call it? This vacuum, right? Lost for words. But when you're operating and making decisions from inside the house in a vacuum, and you're not considering what do customers think, what's in their head, what will they, you're going to make mistakes. So ego drove this bad decision.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to go to another brand, and this is actually one that we can point to ourselves and our creative director, Scott Edwards.
Another Scott.
Another Scott, a different Scott.
Yeah.
Also a contrarian, I might.
And both of them equally brilliant, probably on the 145 or higher IQ scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one is about Krispy Kreme and McDonald's. And we only have to go back a year on this one, March of 2024. And they announced their partnership that they will be expanding nationwide. So they did this test in Kentucky, and they soon turned to your favorite donuts being delivered and sold fresh daily at McDonald's. And this was, nationwide.
Yep.
So being who we are, we took our position as View Lens and applied it to this cross-promotional strategy. And Scott Edwards accurately predicted this would not take off well, nor end well. And we're only a year later, literally 1 year later. And it was announced a couple weeks ago that Krispy Kreme has paused its partnership with McDonald's. So we're kind of banging our chests and saying, I told you so, or at least Scott can say that. Because he wrote in our blog, it's in writing, May of 2024, that this was not going to work out well. So he just wrote another one and said exactly why it didn't go well and what happened. So do you want to explain to our listeners how this partnership was a bad brand move, and how it affects the Krispy Kreme brand identity, which I might add we worked for in part in a little bit, and we knew clear back then that they were having problems with that horrible word ubiquity.
Well, agreed. I read Scott's blog. I got this totally wrong. I thought this was a good partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And I would contend that, I read Scott's blog. So 2 Scotts, right? I thought it was a good idea, and I'll tell you why. I thought, in my mind, and maybe in the public's mind, I don't know, I'd have to take a poll. Krispy Kreme lost its mojo a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Scott's article focused on the fact that McDonald's is known for hot breakfast, and this is not a hot breakfast, and so there's incompatibility. But I would raise up that Dunkin' Donuts, known for cold breakfast, now does hot breakfast, and it's doing quite well. So I'm not sure it's just that. And I'm not sure it's just a positioning problem, although positioning plays a role. It's one of the factors. And here's what I mean. Krispy Kreme, when it started, what was the big thing? What was the mojo? Hot donuts. They had donut theater. They actually showed them being baked and coming down the conveyor, and you got them hot. And what did they do within months of this big, or within the first year? All of a sudden, I find cold, stale Krispy Kreme donuts in every grocery store I shop. So
C-stores, gas stations,
yeah.
everywhere.
So what happened to the fresh, hot donuts? I don't even think of them in that vein anymore. I think of them as a mainstream fast food brand like McDonald's, and it seemed to me it would work. So what do I say? It was deeper than positioning. I think Krispy Kreme has had financial problems. They've been losing revenue. They've been having problems with profitability for a long time. I think this was a Hail Mary kind of play, looking at all the McDonald's challenges. And I also feel they didn't do enough advertising. They didn't. There's actually an article that the shareholders of Krispy Kreme have filed a lawsuit against Krispy Kreme because they failed to disclose the early challenges of the McDonald's partnership. Now, this isn't about positioning. This is about operational stuff, and this is about financial stuff. They said that the donut chain overhyped the potential for sale of donuts inside the fast food giant. Well, this is what they've done. This has been the modus operandi since they started. They've gone too fast, too quickly, from a really cool position that they didn't nurture over time or weren't patient with. And I would say lack of patience is their absolute problem. And then when they did launch in McDonald's, the advertising was short-lived. I mean, and if you look at it, when they advertised, sales were up. And then they pulled the advertising because it wasn't being profitable, because there were back-end problems. So I don't think it's just a positioning mismatch, with deference to Scott Edwards, because he's brilliant and he predicted rightly and I did wrongly. I just think there's more at play here. I do know that the decline in the first quarter, their revenue declined something almost just under 3%, and their EBITDA went down nearly 63%. I mean, wow. I just think that what neither of them counted on was a bad partnership, that there was something going on in the way they constructed this, and they weren't patient with the position, and they weren't patient with the McDonald's rollout. So those two things created an unholy, pun intended, donut situation.
Well, I want to, acknowledging the operations, I want to set that aside, because I got 2 emails back from the email blast that we sent when we published the second article. Both of them said, Scott was right on, because I am unable to think of McDonald's as a place that offers donuts. Like, I want my McMuffin, and I don't give me anything else.
Yep.
So let's look at this from maybe a category standpoint. We talk about when you extend beyond a category or you try to make something broader, like HBO Max, we said they were trying to be all things to all people. This idea that from the standpoint of, I think of McDonald's for my McMuffins and my hot breakfast sandwich, now trying to loop donut into there. And both of these responses were from people that they don't consider themselves like marketers. They were just responding to the article and said, I could never get past that. I just want my McMuffin. So was there a line extension here that might be the problem as well? Or what do you think when we go to the mind and we think about ideas and we pull out breakfast and specifically breakfast at McDonald's? Was there a more basic challenge to this that it just would have never worked? Or if it could have worked beyond advertising, what should the advertising have done to expand the meaning of breakfast at McDonald's?
Well, I think, first of all, you're pointing out the most basic principle of position, right? A brand can only stand for one thing in the mind. So it's not what I think, it's not what you think, it's what's in the mind of the customer. And if you had two people already say, I can't even, bring these two into the orbit together, then we got to honor that. And that's something that could be tested with research, pre-launch. But there's another side. So that's pure position, right? I mean, Heinz is ketchup. Heinz is also mustard, and it's done really well in the mustard category. Well, why? Not because it doesn't really fit, right, what you're saying. I mean, if Heinz is ketchup, how can it be mustard? But people somehow have expanded their thinking to think, well, that's a condiment. They go together. But then Heinz mayonnaise, whoa, no, that doesn't work, right? So
why not?
And Heinz relish works, or pickles. So why? Because they seem to be in a family, and so it's something where you're dealing with the mind. It's a tricky terrain. And so that should have put a question mark for McDonald's. Will people think of us for donuts? And will that hurt our brand? And again, I think they could have used research to find that out. I don't think any amount of advertising is going to save it. On the other side of it, you and I have told this many, many times, that many times a company that we've dealt with, really their focus is one thing, maybe custom specialty, whatever. But they have a lot of off-the-shelf products. And they can still sell those, right? And maybe they need to sell them to fill holes, because the client who wants custom also wants maybe some of these stock things, and they only want to buy from one buyer, make their life simpler. So how do you deal with that? Well, you just don't emphasize the off-the-shelf. You don't make that part of your brand identity. It's on your website. You can buy it. It's there to be sold, but it's not there to define who you are as a brand. So after the initial introduction, let's say it was successful and people were like, oh, this is great because my kids love donuts. I want an egg McMuffin. And that's the other, I think McDonald's was thinking, we deal with families, and families come in and people want different things out of breakfast. And so having, after the initial launch, if they just had it on the menu and didn't promote it, and everything was really about the McDonald's breakfast fare, maybe it would have worked. We're all looking back, and we don't have a clear crystal ball, but apparently Scott Edwards' ball was tuned a little better than mine.
Hey, we get it wrong sometimes. I remember saying we didn't think Dove for men was going to have much of a chance.
Yeah. Well,
that's still around, 10 years later now?
It's super. And they, what they were able to, and this is where people have to take the principles of positioning, as pure as they are, but it's one factor. And it exists within the orchestration of many things. One of which is, if you have, like Dove did, a strong brand already, you command shelf space. You have distribution on your side. This is where I think AJ Lafley's A.G. Lafley's book, Playing to Win, and Roger Martin was the co-author. These 5 strategies that he talks about, one of which is differentiation, but they all have to interrelate. So if I have a really strong position on the shelf in a retailer space, I can leverage that to my advantage. So I think one of the things that really helps Dove for Men, if you ever go to a store, it's just this broad line of Dove skincare for men. And if it works for women, it's going to work for men. And the packaging, the branding was done well with black package, not white. And they were patient in their rollout. And so it works. It does work. If you just stuck with the pure principle of positioning, it's a no. But again, it's not what we say. It's in the mind of the prospect.
Yep. Good. Well, it's a good discussion on some current brand news. And, it's interesting when things are predicted and then you get to revisit them in such a short time. I mean, 2 years and 1 year is a nice way to remind our listeners of topics that we've covered several times, that whether we made a prediction that was accurate or inaccurate, it's always good to go back and see the situation. So
I, for one, am very unhappy that I can't buy Krispy Kreme at my McDonald's. But I also don't buy McDonald's since my heart attack. And so I'm just saying that was my go-to junk place. And so I have to have a little funeral.
Well,
not mine.
In the end, it's healthier for you, Lorraine.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's not my funeral. It's McDonald's and Krispy Kreme.
That's right.
Yeah.
Good. Well, let's wrap up today's episode of the Brand Shorthand Podcast. Thank you to you, Lorraine, for joining us as usual, and for our listeners for joining us. Don't forget to like, share with a friend, shout from a mountaintop, and subscribe. And until next time, have an amazing day.
Monday.
Ain't nobody's business but my own. You say you are